Holmes, it's Mark from the United States.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Mark from the States. How we doing today? I am doing fantastic. I hope you are as well. Come sit on this big fake couch with me, please. Let's enjoy another great video. Let's learn something today. We did a quiz on World War II aircraft not too long ago, a few days ago, and a few of you suggested this video. And I said, okay, let's do it. This is Battle of Britain and Artie Holmes' Hurricane. And I'm always willing to learn about the individuals who make a mark on history. And so I look forward to this video. It's done by the history guy who I absolutely love. Please go support his channel. The link will be in the description as always. And yeah, let's learn something. If you've already seen this video and you've come back, thank you so much. I appreciate it. If you haven't, I encourage you to go watch the video first, then come. And that way you can fill in the inevitable blanks that I'm probably going to have to help me learn. That's what this is all about. So come, sit with me, and let's take a listen.
Episode of The History Guy, brought to you by Magellan TV. The beginning of the Second World War did not go well for the Allies. By the end of June 1940, Poland, the Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, and France had all been defeated, and the British Expeditionary Force had been forced to abandon the continent at Dunkirk, leaving behind most of its equipment and 66,000 casualties. Hitler was determined to force England to capitulate, either by armistice or by conquest, and his plans depended upon the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, to pave the way for the invasion of a suddenly vulnerable island. On June 30th, 1940, Hermann Goering, Supreme Commander of the German Air Force, issued an operational directive that ordered the destruction of the Royal Air Force in whole, including aircraft production, and the stage was set for the Battle of Britain, a battle that for many Britons was encapsulated by a single famous heroic act that demonstrated to all in the realm the grit and determination of the pilots of the RAF. It is history that deserves to be remembered. It was September 15th, 1940, and the Battle of Britain had been grinding on for 2 months. Hitler's plan to destroy RAF Fighter Command and gain air superiority over Britain was taking far longer than expected. But Hitler was still optimistic. His Luftwaffe commanders were sure the RAF was near defeat. To this day, historians disagree to what extent that may have been true. One reason for Hitler's confidence was because the Luftwaffe had recently changed strategy. Starting September 7th, the Germans had shifted from attacking RAF bases and infrastructure to bombing cities, especially London. The common story was that the shift was revenge for British bombing attacks on German cities, but there was more strategy involved. The Luftwaffe felt that the RAF would have no choice but to defend priority targets in the capital. By bombing London, Hitler thought he could finally draw RAF Fighter Command into a massive and decisive battle.
And with that image of the guy ringing the bell, that is a bell you cannot unring. Is that the saying? You cannot put the toothpaste back into the toothpaste tube. Once he bombs a city and civilians, it's game over. And we all know how well how that turned out for him. But I imagine even for him it wasn't a decision. Maybe it was. I don't know. That was taken lightly. I don't think as a pilot, even German pilots wanted to do that. I mean, there may have been a few who were so bitter who did, but I think as a pilot, you want to keep it to the military targets, So being ordered to bomb cities must have been just kind of like for some, for many, for most, really kind of a hard thing to stomach. Watching Masters of the Air on Apple, and it's been so good. If you haven't, I encourage you to watch it. It's really good, but you see their hesitation when they, have to bomb civilians in in civilian areas. Now, granted, they put these factories right smack dab in the middle of neighborhoods and whatnot, but you see the struggle that these people have, and it makes it hard to try to put yourself into their shoes. I could never do such a thing, but there had to have been some internal struggle and even verbal, maybe even physical, with others who maybe refused or who wanted to because they seen their buddies die, and so they were so fit with rage or bitterness that they were at the I don't care anymore stage, but which is probably where you need to be able to do such things, but just remarkable.
The Luftwaffe had reason to be optimistic. The raid on London seemed to have caught the RAF off guard. It rained destruction on the city, destroying more than 100,000 tons of shipping in the Thames. More encouragingly, the RAF defense was not as well organized or tenacious as it has been in August. But the weather had turned bad and limited raids since. With a patch of good weather expected, the Luftwaffe planned its largest attack of the battle. A massive two-pronged raid, including over 600 fighters and 500 bombers, would attack military targets, important rail lines, and Thames dockyards in and around London. Fighter Command had suffered losses of experienced pilots, and its reserves were depleted. But the RAF had weathered the battle better than the Luftwaffe leadership understood. This is partly because the RAF had also changed tactics. Earlier in the battle, the RAF had challenged the bombing raids with larger groups, but in September, the RAF had taken to a strategy of sending smaller groups and minimizing losses, hoping that Hitler would eventually give up when he realized he could not gain air superiority. Preserving the Royal Air Force Fighter Command was seen as most important. The change in strategy is part of the reason that the Luftwaffe was convinced that Fighter Command was more depleted than it really was.
I wonder what turned out to be brilliant, but I wonder what the thought was going through the pilots of the RAF when they were told, okay, we're not going to be sending all of you. We're just going to be sending just a few of you. That's very simplified, of course. For I wasn't there when they announced it, so I don't know exactly how it was announced. But I imagine some pilots were like, "What the heck?" It's like, what, you're putting us up there totally outnumbered, and I get the theory of let's just keep so we're always having someone up there and not kind of using all the eggs in our basket at once, if you will. That for a pilot, that must have been kind of like puzzling at first, but hopefully they understood or maybe they were told, look, we can't lose all of you in 3 raids. We need to stretch it out, right? Yeah. Gosh, these guys were fearless. Man, it's crazy.
But there were some at RAF Command who disagreed with the new strategy. They advocated for what they called the big wing, setting up as many fighters as possible, timing it so they would be in prime position to attack the German aircraft with an altitude advantage. This school of thought posited that they could cause so many German losses that the Germans would conclude that the battle was unwinnable. It was a risky strategy as it committed reserves early and left important targets lightly defended. The RAF had anticipated the attack on the 15th. This may have been because the British had an advantage in intelligence gathering. Britain was able to intercept and decode German communications. But it was not difficult to anticipate that the Germans would attack when the weather cleared. And the British radar system had survived German attacks. The British were aware of the German groups when they were still gathering over France, giving Fighter Command ample warning of their approach.
Huge.
The Battle of Britain always included a fair degree of luck. Radar only gave so much information. For example, it could not distinguish fighter aircraft from bombers. Even with radar, the target and direction were never certain, nor could you be certain what other raids were planned. Directing fighters could be a dicey proposition. Deploy them too late and they would not be in position when the enemy arrived. Too early and they would run short of fuel when the fight came. That day, Air Marshal Sir Keith Rodney Park, who was a New Zealander, concluded that the first blips on the radar screen, detected by a station at Dover at 10:30 a.m., represented a major strike. Assuming the target to be London, Park surmised that the bombers would do as they had done before over London and use the Thames as a navigational aid. He knew exactly where to put his fighters, and he could time the attack so that they would be pouncing on the German formation with the advantage of altitude and out of the sun. Park decided it was time to try the Big Wing. The initial German attack included about 120 Bf-109 fighters and 25 Dornier 17 bombers. The RAF sent up 245 Spitfires and Hurricanes to meet them. One of those was a Hawker Hurricane of No. 504 Squadron, piloted by Raymond Towers Holmes, known to his fellow pilots as Artie, a nickname taken from his initials, RT. He joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve in 1936, just the 55th pilot to join the organization. He joined No. 504 Squadron in June and was an experienced pilot. The Germans were already engaged in a running battle by the time No. 405 Squadron arrived. The fighter cover had been scattered, and the Bf-109s that hadn't been shot down had exhausted their fuel in the dogfights and been forced to turn back. The twin-engine bombers were vulnerable. Holmes saw a formation of 3 bombers headed for central London and roared in for the kill. But as he approached a bomber from the rear, suddenly, everything went black. The bomber had been specifically modified for an experiment. The crew had mounted an infantry flamethrower on the plane.
What?
The crew didn't know if the weapon would destroy a fighter, but they figured it would certainly make them turn away. If it worked, more bombers could be so outfitted, but at 200 miles per hour and 16,000 feet, the weapon didn't work as it should. All the flamethrower did was spout a great stream of black oil, but it failed to light. Still, the oil covered Holmes' windscreen, blocking out his view. I couldn't see a damn thing, he recalled. The wind cleared his screen, but as it did, he realized that he almost hit the bomber's tail. So, Holmes said, I stuck my stick forward and went under him, practically grazing my head on his belly. More fighters swarmed the Dornier, and Holmes went for the next plane. He was unloading his 8.30 caliber machine guns, and as he roared past at 250 miles an hour, he saw something white. He thought a piece of the bomber's wing had come off, but it was a parachute, a crewman forced to bail out by his fire. The parachute snagged on his starboard wing, and he could see the poor devil on his parachute hanging straight out behind him.
No way.
Holmes swung the plane sharply, and the parachute slipped off. Now the lead bomber was in front of him, and it was headed straight for Buckingham Palace. He climbed ahead of it, intending to take it head on, but as he fired, his ammunition gave out. Then a radical thought. There he was coming along, and his tail looked very fragile and inviting, Holmes said. So I thought I'd just take off the tip of his tail. I just went in and hit it for 6. I thought my aircraft would cut right through it, not allowing for the fact that his plane was as strong as mine.
Oh, no.
The closing speed was in excess of 400 miles per hour. The Hurricane hit so hard that it tore the entire double tail section, essentially the back half of the bomber, clean off.
Is that the photo of it? Holy moly. This is a crazy story. Oh my gosh.
The bomber did a somersault so hard that the G-force and the weight of the engines caused them to separate, and it plummeted down. But Holmes's Hurricane was crippled, stuck in a dive. He pulled back the windscreen and bailed out. In the crash, the Dornier's bombs ejected, landing in the vicinity of the palace, but doing only minor damage. The wreck of the bomber crashed into the forecourt of Victoria Station, and Holmes's Hurricane nosedived into the intersection where Buckingham Palace Road meets Pimlico Road, its massive Merlin engine punching through the road and bearing most of the aircraft.
Wow.
Artie Holmes himself landed safely with his parachute on Hugh Street. Witnesses to his act of bravery were able to show him both where his airplane and the bomber had crashed, and amazingly, no one had been killed by the 2 wrecks.
Wow.
They then took him to a brewery on Pimlico Street, and he enjoyed a brandy before returning to the Chelsea barracks.
That's awesome.
The raid on September 15, 1940 was a stunning victory for the Royal Air Force. The Air Ministry released a press statement late that day reporting that, after a day of raids that included more planes than any other engagement in the Battle of Britain, the RAF had shot down a startling 175 to 185 planes.
Wow.
For a loss of less than 40 of their own. Hitler, it seems, saw the defeat as a proof that the Luftwaffe could not attain air superiority. 2 days later, he sent a message to all services. The invasion plan for Britain was postponed indefinitely.
Boom.
The bombing raids would continue, and in fact would turn into the terrible strategic bombing, the night raids that the British called the Blitz. But the raid on September 15th was a turning point. After the German losses that day, the risk of invasion disappeared. Artie Holmes, making his gallant sacrifice at the risk of his own life, in broad daylight, in view of the whole capital, to save Buckingham Palace, became the symbol of the RAF victory in the Battle of Britain. September 15th is now celebrated in the United Kingdom as Battle of Britain Day. Or so goes the popular story, but unfortunately it's really more story than fact. The numbers the Air Command released that day were greatly exaggerated. Now, that can happen in air combat. Kill numbers are often exaggerated, but in this case, they were heavily exaggerated and for propaganda purposes. The Air Ministry wanted to bolster British morale. They wanted to scare the Germans, and they wanted to draw the United States into the war. But in fact, German losses that day were only around 60 aircraft, a third of what the Air Ministry claimed, and not even the worst day for the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain. It's true, the bombers did less damage than they should have for raids that size, but that actually had as much to do with the weather as it had to do with the RAF response. In fact, a whole flight of German bombers had made it into British airspace without being intercepted over Southampton, where they planned to bomb the Spitfire factory there. And if the bombs had landed on target, it could have significantly impacted Britain's ability to produce fighter aircraft. But the target was obscured by clouds, and the bombs missed. The Luftwaffe was hardly demoralized. In fact, Goering was excited when he found out about the RAF response on September 15th. He saw it as proof that he could draw the RAF into a decisive battle. The Germans continued to delude themselves about the actual strength of the Royal Air Force. They convinced themselves that the only way that the RAF put up that many fighters on September 15th is if they'd stripped the whole of the United Kingdom of all their other fighters just to protect London. But in fact, the RAF had not engaged some 40% of the fighters that they had available in southern England. Hitler's decision to forgo the invasion of Great Britain apparently had nothing to do with the losses on September 15th, which didn't seem to bother him much. He'd already come to the conclusion at the end of August that the Luftwaffe would not gain air superiority and that the invasion would not be successful. He had decided that Britain would not capitulate until they had lost hope that the Soviet Union might join them as an ally, and so he had moved on to his next grand scheme, a massive surprise invasion that would drive the Soviets out of the war. In 2004, Holmes's Hurricane was excavated, and the 90-year-old pilot was there to see it.
No way.
They let him hold the control column of his Hurricane one last time, and the switch for the guns was still in the firing position. Ray Artie Holmes passed away in June of 2005. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the...
Please go support the History Guy. That was a great story. Yes, the numbers. And one of the things about the numbers, they said about it was 1/3 of what the official count was of downed aircraft. And one of the things I did learn in Masters of the Air is you have so many different aircraft claiming they shot down the enemy. But with so many aircraft in the air all at once, flying all around, there's multiple people claiming they're the ones who shot down the same aircraft. So you'll have 6 fighters all claim the one, the one bomber or whatever. And you don't really know exactly who, but so you can see how the numbers get inflated that way. Very interesting, though. And the fact that he would just go for the tail like that, ram it with his aircraft, just the bravery. And then at the very end, digging up the plane, excavating it, he's there. I mean, wow. That's crazy. So, in conclusion, it seemed like take them all up instead of just smaller defense, put a huge, what they call it, something wing, great wing, or I forget what they were calling it, but having a large contingent was the choice of the day. And turns out, it really wasn't using all their planes. It was just, we're going to put up a huge resistance, and it seemed like it worked. He did mention that they did still do the blitzkrieg, blitz, not blitzkrieg, but blitz at night and stuff. So yeah, once he starts bombing civilian, not so much civilian targets at this point, but in civilian centers, trying to hit military targets, that's, like I said, you can't undo that. And so the natural progression was just to bomb indiscriminately. And rest is history. I hope you enjoyed that. That was awesome. Thank you to there was like 4 of you, I believe, who suggested this video, and I'm assuming all 4 of you watch the History Guy, so that's how y'all knew right away when we were talking about the hurricane that this video was suggested. So yeah, awesome. Artie Holmes, not because his name's Art, it's because of RT. Awesome. Take care, everybody, and we will see you in the next one. All right, bye.
Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark, and he's from